The disobedient daughter who married a skull. Ephraim Edom was a native of Cobham town. He had a very fine daughter, whose name was Ephraim. All the young men in the country wanted to marry her on account of her beauty, but she refused all offers of marriage in spite of repeated entreaties from her parents, as she was very vain, and said she would only marry the best-looking man in the country, who would have to be young and strong and capable of loving her properly. Most of the men her parents wanted her to marry, although they were rich, were old men and ugly. So the girl continued to disobey her parents, at which they were very much grieved. The skull who lived in the spirit land heard of the beauty of this Calabar virgin, and thought he would like to possess her. So he went about amongst his friends, and borrowed different parts of the body from them, all of the best. From one he got a good head, another lent him a body, a third gave him strong arms, and a fourth lent him a fine pair of legs. At last he was complete, and was a very perfect specimen of manhood. He then left the spirit land and went to Cobham market, where he saw Ephraim and admired her very much. About this time Ephraim heard that a very fine man had been seen in the market, who was better looking than any of the natives. She therefore went to the market at once, and directly she saw the skull in his borrowed beauty, and she fell in love with him and invited him to her house. The skull was delighted and went home with her, and on his arrival was introduced by the girl to her parents, and immediately asked their consent to marry their daughter. At first they refused, as they did not wish her to marry a stranger, but at last they agreed. He lived with Ephraim for 2 days in her parents' house, and then said he wished to take his wife back to his country, which was far off. To this the girl readily agreed, as he was such a fine man, but her parents tried to persuade her not to go. However, being very headstrong, she made up her mind to go, and they started off together. After they had been gone a few days, the father consulted his juju man, who, by casting lots, very soon discovered that his daughter's husband belonged to the spirit land, and that she would surely be killed. They therefore all mourned her as dead. After walking for several days, Ephraim and the skull crossed the border between the spirit land and the human country. Directly they set foot in the spirit land, first of all one man came to the skull and demanded his legs, then another his head, and the next his body, and so on, until in a few minutes the skull was left by itself in all its natural ugliness. At this the girl was very frightened, and wanted to return home. But the skull would not allow this, and ordered her to go with him. When they arrived at the skull's house, they found his mother, who was a very old woman, quite incapable of doing any work, who could only creep about. Ephraim tried her best to help her, and cooked her food, and brought water and firewood for the old woman. The old creature was very grateful for these attentions, and soon became quite fond of Ephraim. One day the old woman told Ephraim that she was very sorry for her, but all the people in the spirit land were cannibals, and when they heard there was a human being in their country, they would come down and kill her and eat her. The skull's mother then hid Ephraim, and as she had looked after her so well, she promised she would send her back to her country as soon as possible, providing that she promised for the future to obey her parents. This Ephraim readily consented to do. Then the old woman sent for the spider, who was a very clever hairdresser, and made him dress Afyong's hair in the latest fashion. She also presented her with anklets and other things on account of her kindness. She then made a juju and called the winds to come and convey Afyong to her home. At first a violent tornado came, with thunder, lightning, and rain, but the skull's mother sent him away as unsuitable. The next wind to come was a gentle breeze, so she told the breeze to carry Afyong to her mother's house, and said goodbye to her. Very soon afterwards the breeze deposited Afyong outside her home and left her there. When the parents saw their daughter, they were very glad, as they had for some months given her up as lost. The father spread soft animals' skins on the ground from where his daughter was standing all the way to the house, so that her feet should not be soiled. Afyong then walked to the house, and her father called all the young girls who belonged to Afyong's company to come and dance, and the feasting and dancing was kept up for 8 days and nights. When the rejoicing was over, the father reported what had happened to the head chief of the town. The chief then passed a law that parents should never allow their daughters to marry strangers who came from a far country. Then the father told his daughter to marry a friend of his, and she willingly consented, and lived with him for many years and had many children. End of chapter 8.